Welcome back to Left, Labor Education for today. This is the weekly recap, where we'll talk about the top 3 stories from the world of work this past week. In our first story, we'll provide an update on the United Auto Workers, who expanded their work stoppages as the parties continue to negotiate. This week, the UAW announced an expansion of its work stoppages at Ford and General Motors, which increases the total number of striking employees to 25,000 out of about 146,000 total United Auto Workers members.
Sadly, despite our willingness to bargain, Ford and GM have refused to make meaningful progress at the table. That's why at noon Eastern Time today, we will expand our strike to these 2 companies.
While expanding strikes at Ford and General Motors assembly plants in Chicago and Lansing, Michigan, the United Auto Workers spared Stellantis from additional expanded work stoppages, citing additional progress in negotiations between the UAW and Stellantis.
We are not calling on any additional members at Stellantis to go on strike. Moments before this broadcast, Stellantis made significant progress on the 2009 cost of living allowance, the right not to cross a picket line, as well as the right to strike over product commitments and plant closures and outsourcing moratoriums. We are excited about this momentum at Stellantis and hope it continues. Until then, we will keep building our arsenal of democracy and we will win. Our strategy is working.
And it appears that that strategy is very much twofold. Part of that strategy is to apply pressure on negotiations with each one of these companies such that if negotiations progress is made, they'll be spared from additional strike activity. However, if no progress is made, then companies can expect to see a deepening of those locations subject to work stoppages from UAW members. But I think the second part of the strike activity is the leveraging of one company against another, so that if the UAW can see progress with one of the big 3 employers, then the other 2 feel pressure to match those improvements.
A union that's not prepared to strike to win is like a fighter with one hand tied behind his back. Without the strike weapon, the war on workers is a rigged fight. For decades, it's been the same story. Unchecked corporate power, disappearing worker power. The result is massive inequality across our society. To restore the balance of power, we have to restore the strike.
Still, the United Auto Workers hasn't gone for the throat just yet, leaving fully operational the pickup manufacturing plants at GM, Ford, and Stellantis, which tend to be cash cows for each of these companies. Meanwhile, the big 3 auto manufacturers appear to be as fed up as ever as the parties continue to spar back and forth, arguing about which party is really to blame for holding up these negotiations and expanding the strike activity, costing workers, companies, and the U.S. economy billions of dollars in the process. In a statement that was released by GM Chair and CEO Mary Barra, she says, "As we saw this week, UAW leadership continues to expand the strike while upping the rhetoric and the theatrics. It's clear that there is no real intent to get an agreement." She also defends General Motors for providing what the union is asking for, which is record-breaking contracts, and suggests that the United Auto Workers and President Shawn Fain have an agenda of their own, which does not perfectly reflect prioritizing workers or the well-being of the companies. It is clear Shawn Fain wants to make history for himself, but it can't be to the detriment of our represented team members and the industry. Serious bargaining happens at the table, not in public, with 2 parties who are willing to roll up their sleeves to get a deal done. The UAW is pitting the companies against one another, but it's a strategy that ultimately only helps the non-union competition. Ford representatives followed a similar sentiment, with Ford CEO Jim Farley saying that if the UAW's goal is a record contract, they have already achieved this. It is grossly irresponsible to escalate these strikes and hurt thousands of families. Finally, Stellantis also issued a number of statements this week expressing their frustration with the UAW tactics despite being left off the UAW naughty list this week. And one of those statements focused on escalation of picket activity at Stellantis plants. I think it's important to focus on multiple parts of this statement. But you can see here in the first paragraph, we've witnessed an escalation of dangerous and even violent behavior by UAW picketers at several of those facilities, including slashing truck tires, jumping on vehicles, following people home, and hurling racial slurs at dedicated Stellantis employees who are merely crossing the picket line to do their jobs. The statement goes on to say words matter. The deliberate use of inflammatory and violent rhetoric is dangerous and needs to stop. The companies are not, quote, the enemy, and we are not at, quote, war. We respect our employees' right to advocate for their position, including their right to peacefully picket, but the violence must stop. We have put a record offer on the table and are working hard to reach an agreement as quickly as possible, which will enable us to go back to work together. Let's make every effort to de-escalate our words and our actions until then. At the same time, in his weekly live stream video, Shawn Fain provided a different account of the picket activity, arguing that it's the UAW and the Big Three workers who refuse to be intimidated.
We've heard of multiple instances from California to Michigan to Massachusetts of violence against our picketers from people crossing our picket line. We've had guns pulled on us, trucks and cars rammed through us, and violent threats hurled at us. And I want to be absolutely clear. We will not be intimidated into backing down by the companies or their scabs. Our cause is just. Striking for a better future to protect our communities and to defeat corporate greed is not just our right, it's our duty. And shame on anyone that would engage in this violence against our members.
And so with these expanded strikes from this week, we still only see about 17% of total UAW members currently participating in those work stoppages. So that means that things could get a whole lot worse for the Big Three before this thing is over. And as I continue to get more updates, I will continue to keep you posted. And in our second story of the week, as I was uploading last week's daily recap video, we received breakthrough announcements from the Writers Guild of America announcing to the public that their work stoppage has finally ended after 148 days. After 148 days, the writer's strike has finally come to an end. Earlier this week, leadership at the Writers Guild of America unanimously voted to end the strike after reaching a minimum basic agreement with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. The two sides were able to reach compromises on multiple key sticking points, including the use of generative AI in the creative process, minimum staffing requirements for writers' rooms, and residuals for streaming platforms. In reference to the minimum basic agreement, leadership at the Writers Guild is very pleased with the progress that was made through these negotiations. However, the president of the Writers Guild of America West, Meredith Steim, did have some sour comments relating to the posture of the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, saying that this strike was way too long because the companies took so long to get serious. I feel sad and pained that it took this long because when we got serious, we got it done in a reasonable amount of time. So much was wasted and lost by just not acting earlier. The ratification vote for that new agreement is scheduled for this upcoming week from October 2nd through October 9th. And in the meantime, the Writers Guild is encouraging continued solidarity with the Screen Actors Guild, who continues to stay on strike against the same organization, the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, which has now been a strike in process for over 75 days. And in our third story of the week, a National Labor Relations Board judge ruled that Starbucks violated federal law by withholding raises and benefits from its unionized stores. Starbucks continues to take center stage as the wave of unfair labor practice charges from 2022 continue to now be adjudicated. There were actually multiple decisions that were released this week in reference to Starbucks, but I want to focus on one that could have particularly widespread effects. And until this decision, most of the union charges against Starbucks were almost exclusively related to a particular store or a cluster, a small cluster of stores. However, as alleged by Starbucks Workers United, this particular charge related to a nationwide campaign to discourage union organizing by offering wage and benefit enhancements only at non-union stores across the country. And in doing so, Starbucks argued that an employer does not have the authority to unilaterally implement wage and benefit enhancements at any stores that are union represented or in the process of organizing. About 6 months after Starbucks stores began organizing toward the end of 2021 into the beginning of 2022, Starbucks announced that it would be lifting its minimum wage for its partners to $15 an hour, while providing enhanced benefits such as credit card tipping, more training opportunities, and faster sick time accrual, but only for partners at non-unionized stores. Again, citing that unionized stores needed to go through a collective bargaining process in order for these benefits to be able to be implemented at those locations. However, in this recent decision, NLRB Judge Mara Luis Anzalone ruled that Starbucks violated the National Labor Relations Act by administering these workplace improvements in the way that it did. Quoting from the decision, respondent used its top executive to launch a corporate-wide effort to manipulate its employees' free choice by conditioning their pay and benefits on their willingness to forego organizing, a direct attack on the Act's central goal. Judge Anzalone also went on to say that the company's announcement of these wage and benefit enhancements in early 2022 was a strategic choice and a strategic decision that was used to discourage workers from joining the union, and cited that the company's communication strategy around these enhancements was all part of a pressure campaign against unionization. And in an emailed statement, Starbucks Workers United commented that, quote, "This is a massive victory for Starbucks workers. With this ruling, Starbucks has finally been held accountable for their despicable carrot and stick union busting strategy." Meanwhile, Starbucks issued statements of their own, saying that we continue to contend that Starbucks adhered to established organizing and collective bargaining rules, and we plan to file exceptions to the administrative law judge's recommendations. The ALJ's recommendation that Starbucks should or could have disregarded these long-held rules creates an untenable situation, which has already been rejected by federal courts, where employers violate the law if they unilaterally include organizing or unionized employees when making changes in wages and benefits, and violate the law if they do not do so. Accordingly, Starbucks has already expressed its intent to appeal this decision. And that'll do it for this week's edition of the Weekly Recap. Those are our 3 big stories of the week. However, you might remember from last week's video that September 30th was the contract expiration for Kaiser Permanente and the coalition of Kaiser Permanente unions. So I'm actually going to be providing a status update on those negotiations in an extra video this week. Be on the lookout for that. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something, and I hope you check back again soon for more. Thanks for watching, and take care.